The silence within the walls of 525 South Winchester Boulevard was never truly silent. It was a rhythmic, suffocating pulse of hammers striking nails, a symphony of architectural madness that spanned 38 years. But 1 minute ago, that pulse stopped, as federal agents breached the labyrinthine corridors, passing doors that open into vertical drops and stairways that lead into ceilings. They didn't find the eccentric remnants of a grieving widow's superstition. Instead, buried within a sealed spirit room, beneath layers of redwood and Victorian velvet, they unearthed a truth that defies the laws of grief. Sarah Winchester wasn't building to keep the ghosts out. She was building to keep something far more ancient, far more predatory, trapped within the timber. As the dust of a century settles, a chilling question hangs in the sterile air of the investigation. If Sarah Winchester spent her entire fortune and the remains of her sanity acting as a jailer for the damned, what happens to the world now that the doors have been pried open? The air in New Haven, Connecticut, should have smelled of blooming dogwood and the salt spray promise of the Atlantic, but for Sarah Pardee, it carried only the cold, metallic tang of an impending curse. We find her in the mid-19th century, a woman of ethereal beauty and a frighteningly sharp intelligence, now paralyzed by a silence so absolute it seems to vibrate within the walls of her chest. The cradle in the nursery does not rock. It sits as a hollow monument to Annie, the infant daughter whose breath vanished into the Connecticut winter like a wisp of smoke. This sudden, chilling stillness is the first note in a requiem that will play for the rest of her life. When her husband, William Wirt Winchester, follows their daughter into the earth shortly thereafter, the devastation does not merely break Sarah's heart. It shatters the very architecture of her reality. The Winchester name, once a badge of American industrial triumph, transforms into a heavy, crimson shroud. As the heir to the fortune of the gun that won the West, Sarah sits in a mansion composed of lengthening shadows, unable to unhear the phantom screams of the thousands felled by the repeating rifle. Every ticking clock sounds like the cocking of a hammer. Every floorboard creak is the footfall of a soldier or a widow she has never met, but whose grief she now mirrors. She is haunted not just by the personal loss of her flesh and blood, but by the crushing moral weight of a fortune built on the elegant mechanics of death. The narrator sees her small, gloved hands trembling as she realizes that her wealth is not comprised of gold, but of an infinite, unpayable blood debt. In the suffocating dark of a Boston parlor, a medium's voice cuts through the veil, offering a chilling ultimatum that sounds like a lifeline. Build. The psychic whispers, the words hanging in the incense-choked air like a sentence. As long as the sound of the hammer rings, you shall live. Stop and you shall die. This is the only escape Sarah can envision, a perpetual motion of wood and nails to outrun the spirits of the slain. She flees to the west, a ghost fleeing ghosts, crossing a continent to find a place where the dirt hasn't yet been soaked in the legacy of her name. She carries with her a grief so vast it requires its own geography. The journey ends on a desolate, windswept plot in San Jose. The sun is setting, casting long, skeletal shadows across the frame of a modest, 8-room farmhouse she has purchased with the blood money. The wind howls through the exposed rafters, a mournful, hungry sound that chills her to the bone. Sarah stands alone in the center of the dirt yard, her black veil whipping in the gale, clutching a set of architectural scales. She looks up at the empty window frames and realizes with a jolt of terror that the silence here is different. It is expectant. The spirits are not behind her. They are already here, waiting for her to begin. The sun never rises on a quiet house in the Santa Clara Valley. For 38 years, the rhythmic, frantic pulse of hammers striking nails becomes the very heartbeat of the Winchester estate, a relentless percussion that drowns out the natural world. Sarah, now whispered about as the widow of San Jose, has fully retreated behind a heavy black silk veil, a shroud she refuses to lift even when the California noon pours like molten gold over the redwood scaffolds. To the neighbors, she is a ghost story told in the light of day. To the narrator, she is a woman dissolving into a psychological descent, where architecture is her only weapon and her only prayer. The house begins to mutate, sprouting turrets and sprawling wings that defy the rational laws of geometry. This is no longer a home. It is a physical manifestation of a mind grappling with a guilt so vast it requires its own geography. Sarah wanders the corridors at 2 a.m., a flickering lantern casting distorted, elongated shadows against walls that lead to nowhere. Her blueprints are not drawn by architects in the light of reason but are delivered during nightly seances in the Blue Room, where she sits in absolute isolation, listening to the static of the afterlife. We see the toll of this obsession in the way her frame has become as thin and brittle as the lath and plaster she commands. She communicates with her army of carpenters only through scribbled notes and muffled voices from behind closed doors. A queen of a hollow, expanding empire. She orders the construction of chimneys that stop inches from the ceiling and closets that open into two-story drops. Nonsensical traps designed to confuse the vengeful spirits of those felled by the Winchester rifle. As the house swells to a staggering 7 stories, the line between her protection and her prison vanishes. Every room she adds is a silent confession. Every staircase to nowhere is a desperate apology to the dead. She is building a monument to her own madness, convinced that if the hammers ever cease, the ghosts will find the door to her bedroom and drag her into the void they inhabit. The narrator feels the quickening of her pulse as she marks the number 13 on every surface. 13 hooks in the seance room, 13 drainage holes in the sinks, a desperate numerological shield against the dark. She is a woman who has forgotten the color of the sky, seeing only the redwood rafters she has ordered to be raised in a never-ending cycle of atonement. The Great San Francisco earthquake of 1906 arrives not as a natural disaster, but as a long-awaited divine reckoning. The ground beneath the mansion heaves like a living thing, and the towering masterpiece of her anxiety begins to groan and splinter. Stained glass shatters into a million jagged diamonds, and the 3 top floors collapse into a heap of twisted timber and broken dreams. Sarah is pinned inside the Daisy Room, the very heart of her sanctuary, as the walls she built to protect her become her cage. In the suffocating dust and the sudden, terrifying silence of the stopped hammers, she hears the wood screaming under the pressure. For the first time, she realizes with horrific clarity that the spirits haven't been kept out by the walls. They have been trapped inside with her all along, and now, they are finally reaching through the ruins to claim their architect. The dust of the 1906 Great Earthquake has long since settled into the floorboards, leaving the Winchester house a scarred, sprawling ruin that Sarah refuses to fully repair. To her, the shaking of the earth was not a tectonic shift, but a divine reprimand, a sign that the spirits were displeased with the pace of her atonement. Now, she is a frail bird, her bones as brittle as the parchment she uses to sketch her nonsensical designs. The psychological isolation of her final years is so profound that the air in the 160 rooms feels thin, recycled through 1,000 lungs that no longer breathe. Sarah is surrounded by the staggering opulence of Lincrusta wallpaper, hand-inlaid parquet floors, and the prismatic glow of Tiffany glass. Yet she is more destitute than a pauper. She is a prisoner of her own religion of 13, a numerological obsession that has become her only remaining tether to sanity. The narrator explores the deep darkness of these final months, where Sarah moves through the labyrinth with a heavy cane, her joints swollen with the same rigidity that has gripped her soul for 4 decades. She is a woman haunted by a debt that gold cannot satisfy. Every night, she retreats to the seance room, a space where only she is permitted to enter. In the dead of a September night in 1922, we witness her final communion with the silence. The room is cold, lit by a single, flickering candle that casts 13 shadows against the walls. Here, the narrator reveals the horrifying apex of her psychological struggle. Sarah has come to believe that the spirits never truly wanted the house as a gift. They demanded it as a grand, architectural interest payment on the Winchester blood money, and now the principal is due. Her deepest fear is not that she will die, but that the house she built to trap the dead has actually been a vessel to prepare her own soul for their consumption. As she lies in her bedroom, the rhythmic, frantic hammering outside her window, the sound that has been her constant companion since 1884, begins to slow. The percussion of her life is fading. She is 83 years old, a small, black-clad figure lost in a bed far too large for her, clutching a crucifix that feels like lead in her withered hands. She dies in the early hours of the morning, the transition from life to death so subtle it barely stirs the heavy velvet curtains. But as her final breath hitches and stops, the house does not feel empty or at peace. Feels hungry. The hammers fall silent for the first time in nearly 40 years, and the sudden, vacuum-like silence is more terrifying than the noise ever was. It is a void that screams through the empty hallways, a collective intake of breath from the 1,000 rooms that have been waiting for their mistress to join them. The chapter closes in a sterile lawyer's office, the air thick with the smell of old paper and ink. The reading of her will is a chillingly detached affair. The document meticulously provides for her family and her loyal staff, ensuring their comfort with the remnants of her staggering fortune. But when the matter of the house arises, a cold pall falls over the room. She has left the sprawling, 24,000-square-foot monster of redwood and brick to a fate that feels suspiciously like a baited trap. As the lawyers close the files, the narrator reveals the final, lingering doubt. Sarah didn't leave the house behind because she was finished with it. She left the doors unlocked so that the world would finally see what happens when the hammers stop. The Winchester Mystery House has spent a century as a curiosity, a sprawling architectural joke for the amusement of tourists who marvel at stairs that hit ceilings and doors that open into the abyss. It has been sanitized into a monument to the bizarre, a quirky relic of a Victorian widow's eccentricity. But the cinematic tone shifts to one of visceral, modern dread as we witness a tactical team from the FBI breaching the perimeter in the gray, clinical light of dawn. This is not a historical tour. It is a federal intervention triggered by the discovery of structural anomalies that defy the laws of both physics and historical record. Using advanced ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging, agents have identified a hidden floor, a pressurized, airless void between the 4th and 5th levels that appears on no blueprint and possesses no visible entrance. The narrator guides us through the breach as agents peel back layers of century-old, ornate Lincrusta wallpaper to reveal not just lath and plaster, but a secondary wall of solid, unoxidized lead. The realization hits with the weight of a physical blow. This wasn't a widow's whim. It was a containment unit. As the white beams of tactical flashlights sweep across the interior of the hidden chamber, the psychological weight of the story reaches its apex. The walls are not merely supports. They are covered in dense, ritualistic geometry, sigils and non-Euclidean equations carved deep into the ancient redwood that match no known occult or mathematical language. The air in this sealed room is unnaturally cold, carrying a scent of ozone and ancient, disturbed earth. The tragedy of Sarah Winchester is violently reimagined in this flickering light. She wasn't a victim of her grief or a woman lost in a labyrinth of her own making. She was a guardian. The narrator reveals the horrific truth. The house was not a home, but a machine, a vast, architectural engine designed to grind the psychic energy of the restless dead into a fine, harmless powder before it could manifest in our world. Sarah Winchester wasn't crazy. She was the most dedicated jailer in human history, sacrificing her reputation, her fortune, and her sanity to keep a predatory, ancient force tethered within the timber of her mansion. The 13ths weren't superstitions. They were anchors in a spiritual blueprint that kept the gate closed. But as the FBI agents, driven by modern curiosity and the arrogance of science, begin to dismantle the lead line supports to catalog the artifacts, the structural and spiritual integrity of the cage is compromised. We hear the house begin to breathe, a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrates in the teeth of the investigators, a sound that has been suppressed for over 100 years. The legacy of the Winchester rifle wasn't just the death of men. It was the invitation of something that feeds on the vacuum left behind by mass violence. The house was the only thing standing between that hunger and the world outside. The documentary concludes with a slow, sweeping shot of the house from above, looking like a sprawling, cancerous growth on the California landscape, its many chimneys reaching up like grasping fingers. The lead investigator sits in a sterile, temporary field office, staring at a weathered, leather-bound diary found in a hidden compartment of the lead room. Sarah's final, secret entry, dated the night the hammers finally stopped in 1922. His hands shake as he reads the jagged, frantic script. The final revelation is not one of peace, but of existential warning. Sarah's last words are a scream from the grave. The wood is tired. The nails are weeping. I have built the cage to the best of my strength, but the debt of the rifle is never paid. Pray they never stop the hammers, for once the silence takes the house, the Winchester legacy will finally be free to hunt. As the screen fades to black, the sound of a single, distant hammer strike echoes once, then stops, leaving the audience in a darkness that feels suddenly, terrifyingly inhabited.